So mindfulness is not about the mind. It's about coming back to the whole experience of being human, which involves feeling into the body.
So our day-to-day chronic stress can produce the same cocktail of chemicals and can cause a heart attack with just stress as well.
So we may have a structural bypass, but we haven't addressed either the spiritual, emotional, or social factors that are driving heart disease. In order to live with your whole heart, you have to learn the practice of embracing your heart.
Can you tell me some of your key findings in this world today when it comes to burnout?
We get what we talk about. We tend to find what we focus on. So I'm focused on what does it mean to live a whole life with our whole heart? How do we live with passion?
Welcome to the Lou Coutinho Show, where we can learn to reimagine our lifestyle.
Dr. Jonathan, it's a pleasure to have you back with us again, the second time on our podcast, Reimagine Your Lifestyle. And there's a reason why we have you back. Everyone loved what you had to share. People spoke so much about how calm and compassionate you were through your entire conversation with us. And of course, I had the chance to talk to you about so many things in relation to cardiology, your book, and now you have a new book, One Heart. And I just love how you have that bit over there saying that you treated over 20,000 hearts before you finally started to look at your own. And that began you on this whole journey of healing and moving into the root cause of health, wellness, and mindfulness. I think that's such a beautiful combination in today's world where you have hardcore cardiology and then you have someone like you who comes and brings in everything that matters beyond just a symptom, which is also important. But what a medicine can't fix, sometimes mindfulness does, and making changes in our lifestyle. So it's a pleasure to have you back. We're looking forward to an amazing conversation with you today, Doctor.
What a pleasure, Luke. Every time I'm with you, you have kind of a glow, and I think people are drawn to the wisdom that you have to share, and especially your community. I'm just struck by how when you are sharing the information on health and wellness and the root causes of disease, people are drawn to the way that you share it and also the example that you lead. You're always sharing yourself, whether it's a new nutritious meal or practicing yoga or with your t-shirt on how you love sleep and how it's so important. You're Mr. Sleep. So for me, it's a real joy to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. I want to get straight into it. One Heart. What a beautiful. I mean, you can just have a quiz around that. What comes to your mind when you read this title, One Heart? That's so beautiful. And I would love to ask you, let's start off with what inspired you to take up this particular topic. I mean, you're a cardiologist, you're trained in Howard, Mount Sinai, you've treated 20,000 plus patients, and you could be adding more and more to the technical part of your profession. But I love how you've naturally moved and added all of these important factors towards your subject of cardiology. So what was the inspiration, Doctor? I would love for you to start off from there.
I went through a very traditional medical education with a book that had 1,000 pages, and I read everything in it and everything about the heart. And it was based around the anatomy of the heart, the physiology, and a lot of fancy technology, which has evolved over the last 25 years since I started medicine. Now we can replace heart valves by going through the groin without opening the chest. We have medications that can help people with failing hearts live longer. And yet, I would say that 80% of the time we are missing the root cause of people's heart disease. And heart disease is the #1 killer around the world in both men and women. And for that reason, I'm passionate about physical heart disease, but it occurred to me that I was sending patients to get procedures in their heart, like stent procedures and bypass procedures. And I think it was Dr. Dean Ornish who taught me. He said, we're trying to bypass the problem, and actually we are bypassing the root problem. So we may have a structural bypass, but we haven't addressed either the spiritual, emotional, or social factors that are driving heart disease. And I became very curious about 15 years ago. First of all, how ironic it was that I was supposed to be helping other people. I was using my mind to share information, but I wasn't using my own heart to help other people heal. And the reason was my heart was so closed. I had built up protective walls for myself as a child who struggled with anxiety and constant worrying thoughts, as a medical student who thought that he wasn't good enough and he was just faking it to get by, among other colleagues at Harvard University where I had imposter syndrome. And so I had put up so many barriers. I was afraid that people would see the real me, that actually made me unable to be a healer of hearts. I was good at prescribing medicines. I was good at ordering tests, but I knew that I had to dig much deeper into the science of how our own spiritual and emotional health affects the physical beating heart so that we stop missing the root cause of so much disease.
Wow. And I love that you're so honest about this. You could have made up a whole other story that, hey, I've fixed so many hearts and now I'm moving into mindfulness. I'm adding all of this. But I love that your lessons come from a space of honesty. And that's what I like from day one, meeting you in California. You had this amazing honesty and innocence in every conversation. It came from your heart. At one point, I was like, is he a cardiologist or is he an emotional healer? The way you were adding value to all of the conversations. But yeah, I remember that night in California, doctor. I wanted to ask you, you talk about the heart and spirituality, and you talk about emotional health as well. I just remembered a case which I want to talk to you about. Okay, there was this lady and she had done a bypass. She had 2 or 3 stents put in. She was on heavy statins and all of that stuff. And we would talk to her. Now, I understand in the medical world, people, doctors especially, have their time limit with patients. That's just how it is. I know a lot of doctors, they say, Luke, I wish I had more time with these patients, but that's how it is. There's a line of patients waiting out. And so we fortunately have that ability to talk to people. And this one lady who had gone through so many heart procedures, she was lonely. She was so lonely. And she would share this with our team all the time. And we would try to get her into groups. She was living in a place where, she couldn't really connect socially with too many people. I think a lot of parts of the Western culture have people who have kind of isolated themselves for whatever reasons. And she had her own fears and social anxiety about being accepted by other people. She was too afraid to go to, church group meetings because she thought, I don't know if I'll be accepted. So she was lonely. And then one fine day, one of her cousins gets in touch with her and is moving to the US and needs a place to stay. And she says, come over and stay at my place. This young girl comes and lives with her. And she went from being lonely to being completely occupied and connected socially once again. And I can't tell you how her blood parameters changed over 3 to 4 months in front of our eyes. And even her medical doctor said, hey, you now have a social connection. And that's why your heart is responding better. And it's just unbelievable that you talk about, social connection and the heart, because while we may need structural changes at any given point, it can save a life. Are we also doing what it takes to actually heal our heart completely and prevent, a major issue like a heart attack or a cardiac arrest or more blockages? So I love that you talk about the spiritual connection and the social connection. Doctor, your book talks about 7 traits. Of course, I want everyone to read the entire book in detail because I love how you explain and break down things into simplicity. But I want you to talk about a little bit about these 7 traits. What's made you organize your book in this particular order?
I hear people all the time using the phrase, from my heart, from the bottom of my heart, or this person really lives and leads from their heart. And I've always wondered, what do they mean by that? I'm a cardiologist. I know everything about the heart. And these people are not cardiologists, but they're using these phrases with a real deep meaning. And I wanted to understand what it really means to live from the heart. So I had to go back to see the origins of this concept of living from your heart, of heartfelt feelings, heartfelt emotions. So I went back 3,000 years and I studied every tradition I could find who talked about what it means, the wisdom of the heart. And so in a very broad sense, I looked at ancient traditions, whether it was Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and I asked the question, what do these religions and traditions have to say about the human heart? Number one, what is its role and what power does it have? And maybe that will give us some of the answers that are missing in the traditional Western education. And some people I can hear already are saying, oh, that's nonsense. Why are you doing that? And so I brought it into the modern times. I asked the same question. I said, if I look at the scientific literature over the last 50 years in medicine, all of the research that's been done about the heart, I wanted to look at the parts beyond the technical. So I looked up, what does psychology impact the heart? How does our social experience impact the heart? What does spirituality have to say about the physical heart? And I came up with, at the end of 6 months of research and 55 interviews, including speaking with you and other world leaders, there were these 7 common answers that I was getting about what does it mean to live from the heart. And there are 7 aspects of the heart. Some people mean them as a metaphor, but I found out that they have direct links on the physical beating heart itself. So as a background, so these are the 7 traits of the heart, and they go in a very specific order, and I try to help people because the last of the 7, we could jump right there. It's warmth, it's social connection, it's love, it's empathy, kindness, and compassion. And there's a lot of talk right now in the world about how that is the cure for loneliness. And I agree. But at the same time, if we jump straight to that, it ignores the needs of so many millions of people who don't even know the first step about how to redevelop and reconnect with their own hearts and with other people. They're so caught up in anxiety, in confusion, in delusion, in fear. And so the first of the 7 traits starts with just steadying the heart. So if I'm called to an emergency situation and somebody's heart is beating 200 beats a minute in a deadly ventricular arrhythmia, ventricular tachycardia in the emergency room, I am not going to start by saying, well, tell me about your social life. I'm not going to start there. We have to have our priorities. And the first priority is, are we steady with our hearts? Are we calm in our lives? Do we have a basic practice of mindfulness? Can we do basic mental techniques to deal with the stresses in our life? The second of these is wisdom. And you may think, well, why wisdom? You know, we don't like to talk about wisdom. What does that even mean? But I was raised by a scientist mother and father, and they taught me the importance of respecting wisdom of our elders, respecting wisdom of other people. And wisdom comes from humility and from listening. So, and the heart itself actually can tell us how to make better decisions. When we listen, when we feel the sensations of the heartbeat, those are what construct the emotions and our thoughts in our mind. So the second is wisdom. The third is openness. So if we don't recognize that we've placed barriers around our own hearts that keep us separated from other people, whether it's fear, anxiety, maybe we were bullied as a child like I was, whatever it is, we can develop the habit and practice of opening our hearts every day to new experiences, new ideas, new people, without being so afraid. And then we lead to the fourth of the timeless traits, which really for me is like the pinnacle, and Brene Brown loves to talk always about this, and this is a whole heart. What does it mean to live with your whole heart? It means not being afraid to share your authentic self. It means being fully present in each and every moment of your life, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So this is living with a whole heart, and I love discussing what that means. There's a practice there. And then once we understand that we have to bring our past into our present so we can create our future in a whole way, then we can bring courage. So we need courage to do this. There's so much fear in today's world. I see it every day. Turn on the news and they're selling fear. You turn on advertising and they're selling fear. So we need to find the roots of courage. So I love courage. And the word courage comes from cur, which in Latin means heart. Courage comes from the heart. And then the last two are, it's not all about courage and fighting, and we can't always be so serious. The people that I love to be with that help heal others, like you, they all have one thing in common. They know how to laugh and they know how to find lightness in the heart. So what does it mean to have a light heart? I have patients who have had high blood pressure, and I know you have for many years. What happens to their hearts when they suffer from high blood pressure? They become thicker and literally heavier on the scale. So when we want to treat them, we want to help people lighten their hearts. And I go into that. And then the last is warmth, which for me is the whole point of it. So people can skip to the end and just read, how do we develop empathy, compassion, kindness, and love, which heal most of the disconnection that we're seeing today.
Wow. This is going to be a bestseller, and I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why. It's not because you've just written the book. It's because it's going to solve the problems of many, many people, not just with cardiac problems, but with everything else. Because like you say, you see disease from the point of the heart, but the whole human body needs exactly what you're talking about. Because this one heart, I love the name of your book. One heart is just literally pumping. Just one heart, right there, right there. It's just, as we're speaking, it's literally pumping blood to trillions of cells. And sometimes we just take life and moments for granted. And, just that one heart, it's keeping us alive. It's keeping every organ nourished. And, I love that. You talk about warmth, the last point. And this is something that I love seeing in kids. I see it in my daughter. Sometimes you tell her a story, and there's a part of the story that she'll ask you to repeat again. And she'll just close her eyes and she's like feeling it. That feeling is the most priceless feeling. It warms my heart. Sometimes I think of her doing that if I want to feel warmth in my heart. Because sometimes as adults, we got to think of 5, 6 different things that's going to warm our heart. We do that as a part of a meditation as well. Think of something or someone that warms your heart. And people take time. Adults take time. But now I just picture her when she's doing that, and it just warms my heart in seconds. And the feeling.
Yeah. So as you're sharing the story about your daughter, there's 3 different layers that are coming clear to me. One is she's having the experience. She's not performing. She's just doing what comes naturally, which for children, which adults forget how to do. We think that, oh, that's just for children. We need to learn the joy and the innocence and the curiosity that we all had when we were children, that maybe we were told, oh, you should draw within the line. So that's the first one. The second is you're appreciating it. And as you're feeling her warmth, your heart is warming. And now the third level is that you're sharing the story with me. And I am having an experience in my own body, my own heart. And it all started with your daughter and you telling the story. It's kind of wild the way these experiences can ripple outward.
That's amazing. And that's why I love that you teach mindfulness as well. Because only if we're mindful can we actually probably even just go into the gallery of our phone, pick up a picture, and actually connect deeply with that picture, feel the warmth of that moment, memories that actually just, really warm up our hearts. And I don't think you can do that without mindfulness. So part of your mindfulness practice, can you tell me what you've been doing with your own patients and people? I know you travel globally as well. How are you teaching mindfulness to people, especially with the challenges we all have? Dopamine burning, social media, screen time, people having short attention spans. These are real problems. It doesn't make us bad. But with mindfulness, we know that we can kind of get people back on track, including children. So can you share some of your practices that have worked beautifully for you and your patients?
Absolutely. There's really 3 levels at which I practice mindfulness. And before going into those 3, I have to share something. You talk about being honest. And I have to always remember that somebody who may be watching, you and me, these healthcare leaders and providers talking about it, may make it seem like, oh, these guys have it all together all the time. They're always doing these things. They're sleeping, they're exercising, they're so healthy. I just want to stop for a second and say, for anyone who's listening, it's not as easy as it looks. And always be skeptical if somebody seems like they have all their stuff together on the internet or Instagram or wherever. We should just realize that these are just human beings who are trying the best that they can in a challenging world. And for me, Luke, I often, if I'm being honest, forget to be mindful. I forget to practice mindfulness. If I raise my voice at one of my children, for instance, you'd say, that's not a doctor who's mindful. So I want to just be clear that part of mindfulness, and some people even interpret the word, is as remembering. So mindfulness is not just being aware, but it requires that we remember that there is a body here and remember that we have certain intentions for our life. So Having said that, my first practice is with myself. When I wake up in the morning, I remind myself that I have a body because I want to jump right into my head. I want to say, "Oh, what am I going to do today? What did I do yesterday?" It's all about doing, doing, doing because this is how we define success. And so I take a deep breath. I feel the breath in the body. I notice that my mind wants to go back into thinking mode, and I gently remind it there's more to this human experience than simply thinking, even though we were taught otherwise. So mindfulness is not about the mind. It's about coming back to the whole experience of being human, which involves feeling into the body. So that's one practice for me. Another is simply sitting quietly for 10 minutes. Whether it's by myself, where I just feel into my body, into my breath, I notice the thinking mind and I bring my attention back into the body, or if I use a guided meditation. And then I bring it, the second level is I help other people with these. So with my patients in the cardiology clinic at the end of a 15-minute visit, and I know it's not a lot of time, but I've found a way after 25 years where we can make that last minute be the most powerful, memorable experience that this person will ever have with a doctor. I sit with them and I invite them. I say, "You've told me about anxiety and stress in the world and how it's affecting your health and making you eat unhealthy foods and impacting your sleep. Would you like to have a gift that is free and you can do anytime? And you don't need a guru or a master to do it." And everyone says yes. So I simply sit for a minute and I coach them to feel into the sensations of their feet on the floor and their legs on the chair and the body in space. And just in a loving, receptive, warm way, I try to have them experience what it's like to give the mind a rest for just 60 seconds. And sometimes patients make an appointment to follow up with me, and it's only like a month later, and I say, "What are you doing here? Everything's fine." They say, "No, I want to do more mindfulness practice." And so that's the second level. The second level is with my patients and with my office staff. Every couple of months, we do a stress management program where I teach them about stress and how to deal with it and mindfulness practice. And then within my healthcare system, so once a month, we have between 1 and 200 nurses, doctors, leaders, and executives together on a Zoom call for 45 minutes. And I teach them the basics of mindfulness. It's called the TIME program, TIME. And we've been doing this for 3 years in a healthcare system with 40,000 employees. And we really are now embedding this basic mindful awareness into our culture. And mindfulness is not about me and my self-help. I believe that mindfulness's purpose is to let us get beyond ourselves, to allow us to fully connect with people and communities around us to be more supportive, because a warm heart is one that is connected with others. A cold heart is one that is closed off to others. So that's a little bit about the mindfulness practice, and I go into a lot of the practices in the book itself.
That's awesome. Yeah, we could learn from that. And I would love to talk about go back to the point where you actually spoke about the fact that the audience watching this usually kind of thinks that everyone has it figured out, but you're absolutely so right. I want to talk about something that happened today. I had someone who left my organization about 2.5 years ago, and she was great at her work. Everything was fabulous. And she just made up a story and left. And we kind of knew that it wasn't true what she was telling us. And today she messages me and she says, "I want to share something with you." And she wants to share it from her heart. She said, "Just hear me out. You don't have to reply to my message. I know I've not been in touch for 2 years. I left on a note which I know wasn't really the best." So I said, I'm all ears. And she told me that about a month before she quit the company, she got diagnosed with cancer. Okay, she had a leukemia. And I just let her speak. And it was really bad. It was a 3rd stage, and she's been fighting it for 2 years. And she finally got her report today, and she's in remission. And she needs about 6 months more for a follow-up to make sure that she's completely into remission. My first question was like, "Why didn't you tell me?" And she said, "Luke, I was so ashamed. I thought I would have let you down." And I said, "Let me down?" She's saying, "No, because you speak so much about cancer. The team is trained, all of us. I feel I let you down by getting the disease." And that came off from her, and I didn't know what to say for a while. I was like, wow, all of us have built guards around our heart. We don't have that courage to, I'm not saying she didn't have the courage. She did look up to me in many ways. She supported me in one of my bestsellers as well. And she just felt, I let you down. And that was her thought. That was her feeling. I got to respect it. That's who she was at that particular time. And today she's come back to say she's in remission, and she kept kind of, practicing everything she learned. And I've asked her, come back, be with us, share this with us. And it was her own mom who told her, go and tell Luke this. So, I bring up this story. It happened today because all of us, including myself, I know I've built guards around my own heart over the last 10 years because I think, I have a position to play in the company. I have a position to play with my patients. Sometimes I got to be strong because once I ended up in the hospital during COVID, and it was for a minor, I think it was a stomach thing, but I got admitted because I couldn't bear the pain. And the doctor came in the next day and he was like, hey, my wife's a fan of you, but what are you doing here? When you get into a hospital, we all worry. And that kind of put more pressure on me. And I had to explain to him that, hey, I'm human. And, so I want people, like you rightly said, to think that I get sick all the time. In fact, our last podcast between you and me were canceled because for the first time in my life, I had a back spasm and I couldn't even move. I couldn't even move. And that's when we got in touch with you and you sent me your wishes and kindly checked in with me a couple of days later. That was really kind of you. But it happens to all of us. It happens to all of us. And I like that you bring out that honest approach because I don't think people should be watching podcasts or being on social media thinking that, hey, there's perfection out there. We're all human beings and we try our best, but we will go through what we have to in our lives as well. So thank you for bringing up that honest space.
Oh, Luke, I love how you brought up a story that's very real. That came up even today, and I'm glad to hear that this woman is doing better. There is a specific group of people who suffer from this this malady, this pain of feeling like they have to be healthy all the time, perfect all the time. And these are people who work in the wellness space. These are people who work in the healing space. And these are people who work in the healthcare space. Because you can imagine that, if you're, let's say, working in banking or working in government, no one expects you to be healthy all the time. You're not talking about it, right? But there's something that is very unique about the work that you do, the work that I do, the work that this woman, this team member does, where we have to be very careful that we don't set expectations of ourselves that are based on illusions and based on false truth. So I just love that we can be a little real here and we can say that just because we're saying that our thoughts and our feelings can impact our physical heart does not mean that if something goes wrong, that it's your fault. You didn't have the right thoughts. You didn't have the right feelings. And I think that that is a pitfall in the wellness space, that some people are inadvertently communicating to others that if you only meditate enough, nothing wrong will ever happen. And I'm here to say, in my experience now, 25 years of doing both the body of medicine, but also now the mind and the spirit, that is it's a dangerous lie that can lead people to feel shame, like the woman that you were working with. And I love that you're creating a community where it's okay. It's okay to experience it all, no matter where you're coming from, to welcome everyone in. And I noticed that about you and your health community.
And I'll second what you just said about the meditation part, because I have another story for that, but it kind of just seals what you said. So Vipassana is a 10-day course, but then there's an advanced course where you do it for 45 days. So 45 days of no speaking to anyone at all. So I was treating a Vipassana teacher. Okay, I knew a very, very nice lady. And then one day she comes diagnosed with cancer. It kind of shattered my beliefs as well, because here's a lady who's doing Vipassana for 45 days. She's got thousands of students literally looking up to her, and she had a cancer. So it kind of, I'll be honest, I went through that thought process that, hey, you meditate at a level which is like super pro. How can, that was my thought process. But when I sat her down and we finished our consult in 30 minutes, it was very clear, and she admitted it. She neglected the physical body. She took care of the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual, but she neglected the physical body. And she says, I know why I have it. I know exactly why I have it. So it's so beautiful that you bring that out, because I hear you when you say, a lot of people say, oh, you just meditate and everything will be fine. But it isn't just that. It's everything together. And your book brings that out. Spirituality, emotional, mental, physical, and all connected to just one heart. So that's absolutely beautiful. Doctor, give me one or two of your most difficult moments in your life where you've kind of overcome it with your own practice, a change in your thought process. I know several of your stories that you shared openly with us back in Cali, but I would love for you to talk to us about anything where you've kind of brought that change.
Yeah, one story comes to mind that I haven't shared very much, and this was about 8 years ago. A part of my job is being what's called on call, for emergencies. And in the healthcare profession, it could be 2 a.m. You're at home with your spouse or with your child, and everyone's sleeping in the house, and then you get a call from the emergency room that you need to get your clothes on right away and run over. So this was one of those nights where I was called in, and I saw someone in the emergency room, and they were very sick, and I spent about an hour and a half getting them stable, and I just went up to the call room in the hospital to try to just rest a little bit. And I got called on my way back to the emergency room with another emergency. And I'm already stressed out. I didn't know a lot of these mindfulness techniques. I was just learning them. I wasn't exercising. I wasn't eating all the junk food in the doctor's lounge, just a terrible combination. I was chronically sleep deprived. Like so many doctors and nurses know exactly what this is like. And so here I am in the emergency room the second time. I finish up work. Now it's 4 a.m. I go back to the call room and I'm lying in the bed. And Luke, I'm having thoughts about wishing that my whole career, even my whole life, was a waste, because I feel suffocating. I'm so exhausted. I feel like I'm not doing what I wanted to do, which is to come from a place of vibrancy, aliveness, a wholeness, of being an example of health. Instead, I was struggling to get through each day and each night because I was exhausted. And in fact, I remember I was trying to be nice to the people in the emergency room, but I know that I was probably rushing with them. I wasn't as kind as I could be. I wasn't proud. In fact, I was ashamed. So I'm lying there at 4 a.m. in the call room, and I have this vision that I'm drowning, that there's a wave of life that's crashing over me, and I can't breathe anymore. And I became very broken up. I was very scared and very sad. Like, is this my whole career, my whole life? And I had just been learning about this practice called cognitive behavioral therapy, or reframing our thoughts. And so I decided in that moment that I was going to try this technique. How can I reframe the idea of drowning underneath this wave where it seems so big? And I said, well, what if I'm seeing it the wrong way? And what if I remember that I'm actually not suffering to be a doctor? I'm very fortunate, because in this short life, I have a privilege of being with people when they're living, when they're dying, and when their loved ones are at their most time of need. And so I just created this image of my mind. Now I'm no longer ever being suffocated by the wave of life. No matter where I am, I'm surfing on top of it, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to have a unique perspective. And in that moment, I said, how can I use this view on top of this wave at the front of healthcare to help all of the other doctors and nurses in call rooms around the world who are having thoughts like, I just want to end it all? And that's when I realized that part of my calling was to help end burnout in healthcare so that we can give better care to our patients.
Wow. And you spoke about this back in California, and you've taken it to a whole different level. So speaking about burnout now, we know burnout is real. It's in corporates, it's amongst the medical fraternity, it's everywhere. There are two perspectives. I was speaking to an organization, and they said that, hey, Luke, if burnout is real, how come everyone in the organization isn't burning out? It's 2 or 3 people in a particular department. So they deep dive further into it. Sometimes you could have a really bad manager, a toxic leader, and then everyone burns out because of their philosophy of work. But it made me think, what about these few random people who are burning out, but no one in their department is burning out? We took them out and we sat them down and we started going over their lifestyles. Okay. And we found out that some people after work were choosing to go and have a lot of drinks, smoke up a lot, and all of that stuff. They were draining themselves. Some chose to go home and sleep. Some chose to go home and binge watch Netflix and a whole load of other stuff, and they slept for 2 to 3 hours. Some people had genuine issues. They were caregivers at home. They had a sick parent. They had to look after them, take them for their medical checkups and come down. So we found people were burning out for different reasons, not always because of your work culture, not always because of your organization. Because after a while, I kind of got tired of being called to organizations to talk just about burnout in general. But we wanted to take it to a more holistic level and figure out that, hey, if you're sleep deprived and you're causing that, you're burning yourself out. And then there are, of course, different situations. So caregivers, we taught them how to handle being a caregiver, how you can respond to your mom being sick, your dad being sick, understanding difficult emotions. And we put these little classes together, but you've been doing it at a macro level. Can you tell me some of your key findings in this world today when it comes to burnout? And how are you helping doctors, nurses, and even your patients overcome burnout?
I love the perspective that you're giving there, Luke, and that's only possible by somebody who is in the trenches doing the work. Because someone who is more academic or theoretical might say, oh, burnout has 3 criteria established by Christina Maslach in the 1980s or so, and we know the technical, and that used to be how I would talk about burnout. And I've encountered enough pushback and enough real-world experience now working at an executive level for a large healthcare system, really trying to end burnout and promote well-being. And at the same time, outside of my healthcare system, I think this is how maybe you and I first connected. It was 3 years ago. I founded a group called the Ending Clinician Burnout Global Community. And I hosted a 3-day event with Arianna Huffington and the medical director of Calm and a couple of other big leaders in the industry. We had 80 speakers. And I interviewed various people about burnout from all different sectors, healthcare and beyond. And what started to become clear to me is that burnout is not strictly an individual problem. In other words, it used to be that doctors and nurses and business leaders were made to feel like if you're burning out, there's something wrong with you. That was the original teaching. We now know that the majority of burnout in the workplace is driven by organizational factors, dysfunction, like you alluded to. Usually it's one or a group of toxic leaders who don't have self-awareness about how they're showing up in the workplace and the impact they're having on everyone around them. So people are running scared. So people are in a fight or flight mode and they're not able to heal others with warm hearts. They're so afraid for their own well-being. So one big learning, Luke, is that there's the organizational piece of burnout for sure. We need to think like organizational psychologists. We can't just be mindfulness teachers. And the other side, there is the individual piece of burnout. Like you said, why is it that some people, some children, can grow up in absolute poverty? Mother was an alcoholic and father, had mental health challenges. And these are the people like our friend Jim Doty, who grew up in this and now goes on to work with the Dalai Lama to bring compassion to the world. Why do some people have resilience like this and others don't? And that comes from these daily practices of personal well-being, which is around sleep, around movement, around nutrition, stress management, and most important, prioritizing social connection with others, love for others, which begins with love for ourselves. So I know we're kind of going in lots of different directions, but my biggest learning is that for me personally, getting real again, people used to say, oh, you're the burnout expert. And I said, no. I don't want to spend the next 50 years being a burnout expert because we get what we talk about. We tend to find what we focus on. So I'm less focused on burnout. I'm focused on what does it mean to live a whole life with our whole heart? Yeah. How do we live with passion? And if we focus on these things that we want to find, the other things tend to take care of themselves to some degree.
No, absolutely. That's the right way to back into it, because we can go on talking about burnout all the time. But I like what you talk about. If we get the heart right, if we really, really learn to use every part of our heart the right way, bringing empathy, warmth, everything into the situation, we start caring for ourselves. I think that's the biggest challenge, getting people to care for themselves. And, I always say, you always prioritize what you value. And today, most people, unfortunately, don't value themselves. And I don't say this in a disrespectful way. They have like a sick parent that they put more value on for the right reasons. And they're like, it's okay. I know a lot of people who have given up their health to look after someone else who's sick. Now, that's commendable. All of that is great. But we're trying to teach people that, hey, it can be two ways. You can also look after yourself and you can also look after someone else. Because we sometimes, as human beings, and on my podcast with Gabor Mate, he beautifully brought out how civilizations, according to where we were ruled by the British, our parents were taught just one thing: keep quiet. You're not allowed to express. You're not allowed to express emotions, feelings, rights, or anything. So our grandparents passed that on to our parents passed it on to us indirectly, consciously, subconsciously. And so if you look in the Indian community, till date, there will be people who do not express their feelings. There will be young girls who are raped and molested by family members, by drivers. And when they go to speak to their parents, they're told like, hey, don't ever speak about this. No one will marry you. Or worse, the parents put the blame on the child. Oh, you must have done something to make this happen. And we see this today in end cancer cases and a whole lot of disease. But when I spoke to Gabor about this, he beautifully explained on how this is generational trauma coming down. And so people still, like, we lived where our grandparents couldn't express, so we were taught, don't say anything. You were not allowed to fight for your freedom. And all of this has come down to us not standing up for what is right, just being quiet, just aping other cultures and all of that stuff. So I love that you've gone in a whole circle, but it actually comes back to exactly what you're saying. Until we learn to care for ourselves. Dr. Jonathan, I've seen young couples and even men and women who have gone through divorces, and they're like, when they explain everything that's happened, they've never been able to feel love that a partner gives them because they don't love themselves. Even though a partner's giving them all the love, and people are saying, hey, I wish I had a partner like you. That person has never felt love in their life before, and they don't know. They've guarded themselves. They've blocked their hearts towards receiving it, which is why I love in your previous book, you even spoke about the emotion of receiving. It's great to give, but can we all lower our guards that we built around to even receive, even if it's a compliment? For the longest time, I found it difficult to handle a compliment from anyone. I would change the topic. I would kind of, break it down, make a joke out of it. And then I was like, why? Don't I feel deserving of it? And then I kind of uncovered this whole thing of me trying to be a people pleaser in the initial years of my profession, because we were not being accepted by doctors. No one knew what integrative medicine was. People thought we were alternative. So just to kind of stand out over there, I kind of assumed the role of being a people pleaser to get people to listen to me, just listen to my idea. And, it all comes down to what you said. Yeah. So, yes, I agree. We've built guards around our heart. And I love that your book talks about that little detail, because a lot of people want to jump straight into mindfulness. They want to jump straight into meditation. But it's not going to work unless they go through these 7 traits that you've spoken about. Yeah. And I love, you need to put this into a workshop. You need to make your book into a workshop, because I think it's what corporates across the world needs when it comes to burnout. And I'm sure once your book's out, we'll find different ways to work towards that. But
absolutely.
I love that, Doctor,
Luke,
sorry, you were saying something. Go ahead.
Oh,
please.
Yeah. One thought came to mind as you were speaking, and this is something that I discovered in my own studies. I practiced mindfulness and meditation for about 5 years before I realized that something was missing. And anytime someone asks me, can we talk about mindfulness, I want to be very clear that we can't begin with mindfulness alone. It has to be combined with one other thing. And this isn't me. This is from the original Buddhist teaching, from the Buddha. He didn't teach mindfulness in isolation when he wrote the Satipatthana Sutta, 2,500 years ago, instructions in mindfulness. Mindfulness was just one of 7 traits which lead towards enlightenment. Only one. And we need to also combine it with compassion.
Mhm.
And so this is the teaching. The teaching is that it took me 5 years of trying to meditate like I was going to be some kind of a world champion meditator. I could sit silently for 7 days straight in a monastery. Like I did all this, but I was missing the most important piece, which was the heart, which was the heart of compassion. Because mindfulness by itself can be very empty without a deep concern for our own well-being, a commitment to care for ourselves, not just with our minds and our thoughts, but to actually do caring actions. Care is a verb, and to care, eventually to care for other people, and as you alluded to learn how to allow others to care for us, which means asking for help. And you gave several examples during this conversation of people who were afraid to ask for help. You talked about a woman in your group. You also made reference to large parts of the Indian population because of intergenerational trauma passed down. There's a culture where it's not acceptable to ask for help. And you alluded to Gabor Mate's work, who wrote a beautiful book called When the Body Says No. And the body, what is saying no to is, I'm tired of being closed off to emotions. I need to express how I'm feeling, or these feelings become internalized and they can manifest in disease in the heart and other organs. So you've touched on so many topics here, Luke. I love talking with you.
No, me too. And I think I've kind of put these, and that's why I like that you said, you said you went all over the place to come back to that answer, but it actually put that piece of the puzzle where it's supposed to be put. Because the next thing is like, why don't people care about themselves? I've had young children come to me like, why doesn't my dad care about himself? Because, he's in hospital and sometimes you speak to the family. I've heard young girls speaking, why doesn't my dad care about herself? Why does my mom care about herself? And it kind of makes me think like we care about everyone else. Like tomorrow, if anyone gets a call, I know, and that's beautiful about our country, India. You ask anyone for help, they will go out of their way. Most people, they will go out of their way to help. They have like this hospitality and warmth built in their hearts. But then why don't you do it for you? Why don't you care about yourself? And I think I got that missing answer. If we can't show compassion to ourselves, it's easy to give it to other people, but we can never, look after our own selves. So I love that you talk about that. Doctor, your book's going to be out really soon now. And I know it's going to be out in India really soon. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for our country to have access to your book, launched in our own country, India. But between the time they read and right now, you spoke about reconnecting with ourselves. Okay, I think that's a huge one. Most of us are connected outwards. We're connected to who we want to be, who we should be. We're connected with work. We're connected with virtual lives and social media. I know you spoke beautifully about silence. One of the reasons I love 10 minutes of silence, because I feel automatically it just reconnects us. And if I can do the 10 minutes of silence in nature, it's like, it just makes it so much more easier. What are some of the tips that you would leave us with to reconnect with our hearts? Before we start following all of your 7 traits, before we get our hands on that, how can anyone watching this right now, if we feel today that we've connected too much with the outside world and people and AI or whatever it is, that's all good. But now we need to reconnect with our hearts. Where would we start?
We have to start with the wisdom that says that there is lots of pain in life. And much of our suffering and our disease comes from pretending that we can avoid and run away from the pain. And we can hide from it, whether it's through smoking or drinking or Netflix or binging, or through anger outbursts, or even through rumination and worry. That's a way of avoiding experiencing pain. So if we want to reconnect with our hearts, we have to welcome their sensitivity again. We have to welcome the fact that they are fragile and that we have illusions that we are unbeatable, that we are always going to be strong and tough, outwardly so. But the heart is not a tough organ. It's a sensitive organ. It's strong, but it's very sensitive. So the first step, if someone wants to reconnect with their own heart, they feel like they're closed off. They feel like they're not experiencing life in the full way, is to accept their own situation as it is in the moment, and stop trying to run away from it. Stop trying to fight it. Stop judging yourself and feeling ashamed of whatever it is that you're feeling. Can you just hold yourself? Maybe you never got that as a child. Maybe your parents never held you. But In order to live with your whole heart, you have to learn the practice of embracing your heart in all of its parts, even the parts that are scary. So that's the first step. The second step is once we see the pain, we care for the pain. And what does that mean? It doesn't mean having pity for the pain. It means doing something. If we're feeling sluggish, it means going for a walk. If it means having too much stress and chaos from the news, it means throwing our phone in the garbage for a day. It means promising ourselves that we're going to have silence in our life, because this world does not want silence. Silence doesn't sell.
Yeah.
And then the third step to reconnecting with our life is, instead of deciding what we want to close our hearts off from, this person and this boss and that job, and what we want to run away from, all the pain and fear and uncertainty, instead, try a different way. Just close your eyes and imagine, how would you like your life to feel each day? Instead of what are you afraid of, what do you want to run away from, what do you choose to run towards? And this, for me, is the way of reconnecting with our hearts, because the answer ultimately, yes, we want to run towards more curiosity and more joy and more laughter, but ultimately, I think we're all, if we are listening carefully, we want to run towards love.
I agree with you. I think everything leads back towards that. Even if it's a workaholic, they're earning money to spend money on something they love or someone they love. It all leads back to love. There's no doubt about that. That's beautiful. Doctor, I wanted to, before I have you share your wisdom with the audience before we end this today, I had a family, I think he was 90 and his wife was 88 years old. He passed away, and 6 hours later, she passed away as well. Okay. And the daughter asked me that, Luke, did my mom die of a broken heart? Because they were like together always. They were the ideal, kind of marriage, ideal everything and stuff like that. And she just passed away. She was an absolutely healthy person. She asked me that question, that I said, I believe you can die of a broken heart because it has feeling, it has emotion, it has all of these things. She didn't go into shock when he died. She was like, he was dying and she knew it. But 6 hours away, peacefully, everything done. She's just found, she's passed away peacefully. So what's your take on this? You can have different perspectives. I believe she died of a broken heart. And I want to put that message out, because a lot of people, they lose love like in a normal relationship and they think their heart's broken. It's mainly their ego and pride. And we don't want them to think that they're going to die. But the point is, what's your take on all of this in your experience as a cardiologist?
She absolutely did. Yeah,
Wow.
she did. So to get very specific here, there is a specific term called a broken heart. And we're not talking, like you said, the teenager who's, maybe ending a relationship and they think the world is ending. Oh, my heart is breaking. What we're talking about is a specific medical condition that was first discovered in the late 1970s in Japan, in the circumference of an earthquake, where people who were dozens, if not hundreds of miles away from any physical damage were showing up in the emergency room with heart attack. But there were no blockages in their arteries, So how is it that these otherwise healthy people were having heart attacks and their hearts were changing their shape as the doctors were examining? The heart was becoming weaker. And it was because of the emotional shock, the emotional stress, and the fear of just an earthquake. And since then, this has been called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, or apical ballooning syndrome, also called stress cardiomyopathy, and as you alluded to, the broken heart syndrome, which is very common now, much more than we knew. We also have a second scenario that you described, which is the dying of a grieving heart. And we know that when a loved one dies, the risk of dying increases by more than 20 times in the next 24 hours. So this is not a unique experience that your patient had. This is in the medical literature, very well known. And the question is, why does this happen? And it's fascinating. I go into detail. I spend a whole chapter talking about the science of how our emotions like grief can break our hearts. But basically, there's chemicals, there's nerves that send lots of different signals around the body that can cause high blood pressure, a fast heartbeat, abnormal heart rhythms, blood clots, etc. Eventually, it can take our life away. So it is possible that that's what happened.
Wow. So our day-to-day chronic stress can produce the same cocktail of chemicals and can cause a heart attack with just
Yeah.
stress as well.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's a threshold effect, the way I think about it. I
Yeah.
never want to worry someone that, oh, I'm having a panic attack, then I'm going to have a heart attack. That makes it worse.
Yeah.
So like you said,
Right.
we're not trying to create anxiety if someone feels
Mm.
stress, chronic stress, but we are at least giving a little bit of the power of understanding that it's not
Yeah.
healthy to live that way, and that over time those stresses build and there's a certain threshold, and once we go beyond it, we have manifestations in the heart. The blood pressure goes up. The heart has abnormal heart rhythms called atrial fibrillation, PVCs, etc. Not to mention, chronic stress leads to stress-related health lifestyle habits that you see all the time. Why am I eating so much, doctor? Why can't I sleep at night? It's a lot of it is chronic stress, and some of it is unresolved emotions relating to grief, loneliness, sadness, or even our childhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Doctor, I could go on talking to you for ages. I mean, this has just been so, so amazing. And I wish you well for the book. I know there are going to be other books that come up, but I really, really encourage you to think about, making this book into a masterclass.
Okay.
Like, it's amazing because, see, I'll tell you what, people will read a book. Most people will. There are some people who have taken some of my books, broken it down, made notes, made like entire kind of sessions out of it to educate themselves and remind themselves. And sometimes people read a book, sounds great, amazing, feels great, and then we're back to our normal lives without practicing. But everything that you spoke, what I love about the book and the way you've put it together, you've given it stages that leads you to, it's easy to say like find love and find compassion, but the next question is, where's the tool? How do we do it? And I love that you've put this book together in that format. We can't wait for it to be out here in India. Thank you, Doctor. I'm not going to let you go until you share over the last 1 month, your learnings, okay? Your learnings over the last 1 month. What would you want to share with the audience to look after that one heart that we all have?
So Luke, this is, as every time I speak with you is a joy, and I learn something new. And you're setting an example of how to not just take care of yourself, but to do the harder thing, which is to balance concern for others and care for others while also taking care of yourself, and sort of to shift between both of those. So that's what I learned from you, and that's what I appreciate. Not to mention your generosity. For people who don't know you, it's really legendary. And so I want to say that. Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, of course. And so what I've learned over the last month, I think what I'm focusing on now is on friendship. Friendship.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds strange. Why is a heart doctor, an author, a healthcare leader talking about friendship? He should be talking about aspirin and statins and heart bypass. but I really, as I'm getting older and as I'm seeing life change, there's nothing for me more important than finding friends who we feel comfortable enough sharing our true selves with them, and
Beautiful.
who provide us with the sense of belonging. And I think that not just those of us who are, let's say, caring for children or caring for a loved one who's sick, remembering that we have to be friends to ourselves, we also want to have at least one good friend who we can share with, we can share life's burdens but also joys with. I also think this has very important applications in the industries that we work in organizations. They say, what's wrong? Why are people leaving? We don't have enough friendship. And so I'm interested in how can we bring more of those relationships into our healthcare system and in other industries to help our general health.
That's beautiful. And this is amazing. I mean, you always have something so unique to share with everyone. And it doesn't look like you're growing older. I think your longevity drug is feeling with your heart and speaking with your heart. And I've seen that three years ago, Doctor. It's been 3 years since Cali. And you look the same. And I honestly feel that. Sometimes I feel the way we look is a reflection of how we think, how we feel, and what we speak. And I think you're that legend out there. I think you can have a whole one-step Korean skincare kind of going for you, which is just one heart, feeling and speaking with your heart. And I made it.
Okay.
I made it.
Let's work on it. Let's work on it.
I'm not here to judge people, but sometimes, I would walk into a club and I would see happiest people just
Yeah.
laughing and smiling. And there's something so attractive about them. You want to
Mm.
spend time with them. And then you'll see some really dressed up people not smiling, all like, all, I mean, I don't know whether it's the job they have on their face or whether it's just the way they are. I'm not here to judge them, but it shows. It just shows. It just shows on the outside of the face. And I think one heart's going to like kind of look into all of these little things, including the whole cosmetic part of it. So I wish you well with your book, Doctor. And I look forward to having you in India sometime. That plan is still on.
Yes.
And we look forward to having you down in India sometime to spend time with our audience, our patients, and everyone else. So thank you so much once again. Thank you for your time, as always, and stay in touch.
Thank you, brother.
So thank you.
Stay tuned for more. We're going to continue our journey, learning, sharing, and evolving.